Hey folks, once again, welcome to the Roland Grimes, not just sports and entertainment show. Of course, I'm your host, Roland Bubba Grimes. We're going to have a very intimate conversation here with Dr. Mcunu. We're going to talk initially about NFL retirees, former football players, and some of the things that we have to endure as former athletes, especially in the game of football, in terms of managing pain, in terms of addiction, and some other things that you all hear about in the news quite frequently today. Dr. Mcunu, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
Doctor, we're going to get right into this, and we're going to hit it, and we're going to hit it hard.
Sure.
The statistics say that former football players, especially those who played in NFL,
Right.
are having a lot of difficulty in many cases with dealing with life after, but specifically in terms of addiction to pain medicines and other narcotics.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about some of that data.
Yeah, some of the biggest problem we have is that some of these players, they end up playing hurt. We have a lot of examples of some of these players who have been injected, they've been hurt, they get knocked out of the game, and they go back in the back rooms, and they end up receiving some medications.
Doc, that's 90% of us. It's not some of us.
But and that's a big problem because a lot of the medications, the statistics are showing that over 60% of those patients are receiving those medications not under physician supervision. So they're receiving that medication from trainers. So what that does is it begins a cycle of dependency where these guys, particularly some of these younger guys, they get used to these medications. They deal with the aches and the pains that never go away, that never get addressed because you sort of put a Band-Aid over those aches and pains. And then those guys end up at the end of their careers being addicted to this medication.
Okay, so help me understand this now. What is the difference between an athletic trainer and a doctor? I mean, I don't really know the distinction between the two. So the college program or the professional program, they have athletic trainers.
So a doctor, a physician, what we call a sports physician, is someone who has an MD, has gone to medical school, has received training, has received the ability to an authorization to write prescription medications. They can write prescriptions, they can diagnose the guys, they can order specific tests. A trainer is different in the sense that he or she is designed to basically help the players to get conditioned, make sure they get the proper stretches, identify certain exercises that can help to enhance their performance.
Okay.
So that's a huge difference, and none of those people have the authority to dispense any medications.
Okay, now in major college programs, as an example, you have a sports medicine department essentially.
That's correct.
And these folks are oftentimes students,
Yeah.
and they're involved with training to become licensed physical therapists, etc.
That's correct.
But you're right. They don't dispense medication, and they're not licensed to do injections, anesthesia, or anything like that to any degree.
No question about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they don't. But in some cases, because of the nature of the business or the nature of the pressure, etc., you think that oftentimes they end up doing it.
Oftentimes, and that's what we're hearing from the NFL players. The ESPN commissioned a study that was published recently.
Let's talk about it.
And the ESPN, as you know, you may know that about 4,000 players right now have lined up to sue the NFL because of the post-concussion syndrome. What's going on is that the ESPN interviewed a variety of these players, and what they discovered is that a lot of these guys have been receiving medications not by the doctors, but by the coaches, maybe instructing some of the trainers to dispense these medications so they can get these guys. You know, basically a lot of these trainers will tell you that, look, my job is on the line.
Right.
If I don't get this guy back on the field, then what's my value as a trainer? So basically they have to do what they have to do as well. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, the person that receives the brunt of that assault is going to be the player.
Now, the player wants to get back on the field.
Right.
Everybody wants to put the player back on the field. So, what do you see as some of the dangers?
Think about it this way. You have a guy like Alex Smith. Alex Smith sustained
San Francisco 49ers quarterback.
Yes,
Yeah.
he sustained a concussion. Leading up to his concussion, this guy, he was playing lights out. And statistically, the 49ers are doing great with him. So now the guy gets a concussion, and all of a sudden he loses his job. And so if you think about that, then so that you now create a culture where these guys are going to, essentially they're going to minimize their symptoms so that they don't lose their jobs.
Well, historically, that's what we do anyway.
And that's a problem, because what happens is that a lot of these guys who sustain concussions, and what we're seeing, the statistics, one of the things that came out of this study, is that a lot of these guys who have actually had multiple traumatic injuries, they have sustained what we call a concussion. And the concussion, by definition, is called a closed brain injury. And I always say, anytime you say the word injury with brain, that's never a good thing. And so traumatic brain injury leads to long-term sequelae.
What are some of those
symptoms? One of the biggest problems that we see with these patients is, number one, they start having problems with memory. A lot of them have memory loss. And a lot of them, because the concussions, particularly the two areas in the brain that we've identified that are linked to this behavior. One is in the front of the brain. That area is usually known as the frontal lobe.
Frontal lobe, right?
The frontal lobe. Now, if you remember olden days when they used to run
lobotomies.
Right. So they would lobotomize these folks because they tried to decrease their aggression.
Exactly.
So now think about it.
Now this is true. This actually happens.
Absolutely, still happening in some places.
In some countries.
So if you think about it from this vantage point, if these guys usually have scar tissue, and injury is centered on that area of aggression. So they have scar tissue. Their brain sections that have been taken from patients that have died, and some of these players that have killed themselves, have been linked to injuries related to that. The second area is called the amygdala. It's like a pea-sized region of the brain that is concerned with survival, aggression, and so that region as well has been shown to.
Well, in the movie Waterboy, they call it the medulla oblongata.
That's different. That's at the base of the brain. So that's centered on the coordination.
So this is another area.
Yeah, this is called amygdala. And yeah, so it's very, it's a tiny little area, but it's very, it's been studied that you can actually, if you stimulate that area, it can incite aggression. So the key with the concussions, though, Roland, is that a lot of these guys, when they leave the NFL, the correlation between substance abuse and concussion is exceptionally high. We're talking about 70% or greater of patients that have been, of post-NFL players that have been identified as having substance abuse have had repeated concussions.
Now, why is that link so prevalent between concussion, post-concussion trauma, post-brain trauma, and substance abuse? Why is that link so prevalent?
We're not sure why. We can only speculate based on the location of the areas. That when we look at the slices of the sections, there's a doctor in Boston who has a special interest in this, and she has actually studied a lot of these brains. Junior Seau, for instance, remember, he killed himself. And this is a guy who, normally a lot of these guys have depressive symptoms. They are angry all the time. They're fighting with spouses. And you worry about, for instance, we have a young guy who just killed his 22-year-old girlfriend. And actually killed this young lady in front of her, his mother, and leaving behind, after he killed himself and leaving behind a three-month-old. So right now there are stories that he suffered from concussions, but the NFL has already beat back on the story. So it's not, we're not sure how true that is. But it's multiple players like that who have actually, a lot of the players that have recently died, suicide or drug overdose, there has been a strong link to concussions. There's no question about that.
We'll take a break. Hey folks, we'll be back with you shortly. Roland Grimes, Not Just Sports Entertainment Show with Dr. Mcunu. We're going to get into this a little bit deeper. Sit tight. Welcome back to the Roland Grimes, Not Just Sports and Entertainment Show, dealing with sports. Dr. Mcunu. Substance abuse. What does that mean in your world as it pertains to former football players? Is it cocaine? Is it heroin? Is it painkillers? Is it speed? What is it?
Most of these guys end up combining all of those. Initially, a lot of them will combine them. So think about it this way. So a lot of these guys,
like Elvis Presley did when he was okay.
No question about it. Like Michael Jackson. I mean, Michael Jackson was
You know what?
supposedly
That's a good point.
Yeah, so like Michael Jackson. So what happens is that these guys, they are addicted to this. They have pains. They have chronic pains. So they have a perception of pain in their brain that they just can never shake. It's there all the time. They just feel that they just cannot get enough medications to take care of that pain. So it becomes a centralized pain. As a heart surgeon, I always tell my patients that once the pain develops a brain component, it becomes harder to get rid of.
As the brain, say that one more time.
Once a pain assumes a component in the brain, in other words, when the brain takes over and takes control of the pain situation, it's difficult to get rid of that pain when you're treating patients. And that's one of the reasons.
Because it becomes psychosomatic, or it's just the
becomes
neurological link, or kind of both?
Well, there's certain receptors in the brain that are very, particularly to narcotics. You know, they are things like Vicodin, things like codeine, things like methadone. So those are the typical abuse medications. Things like the sleep aids. So once you take those are the medications that you have some players that are taking like 60 to 80 of those pills a day. So what happens is that those pills will slow you down. They will make you sleepy. So a lot of these guys will take cocaine so they can function. So they raise their functional level, and so to bring themselves down, they go back to the narcotics. So it becomes a cocktail. So they'll take a cocktail of those pills.
And you see this. You see the cocktail as starting. You see the onset of the cocktail as a reaction to this pain that we continue to have once we finish playing ball.
Absolutely, and there's no question about it. And this study by the ESPN was very, very clear on those findings that these guys, they start in the NFL. They will, some of these guys when they're traveling, from one place to the next of the game, they have bags. Some of the trainers have bags of this Vicodins and pills, and give them the pills so that they can take care of some of their aches and pains. And some of them are regarded as a routine part of it. So what happens is that some of these young guys now all of a sudden they're blowing through their retirement, and you're wondering why a 46-year-old guy who supposedly has made millions of dollars is now broke because they have literally spent their retirement on this addiction.
So let's talk about that now. Part of, like, for example, with me, and I'm one of those guys.
Sure.
I deal with the pain. When I played football, it was a lot easier to deal with the pain because the adrenaline of playing blocked out a lot of that.
You bet.
We played University of Pittsburgh that morning. When I woke up and went to the bathroom, I could not walk from my bed to the bathroom.
Absolutely.
I couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how I was going to get through this game. Not only did I play the entire game, I played one of my better games. And I don't know to this day how I did that, other than when we got closer to the game and adrenaline kicked in, I started to just rise above this. Now, I didn't take any painkillers. I didn't take any shots. And I'm not saying this because I'm holier than thou. It's just that I've gotten so used to that system and that process that I always knew I was going to overcome it. Now, as I get older, I don't have that kind of adrenaline rush anymore.
Sure.
I don't have that kind of incentive to get up, go and tackle somebody or have someone tackle me.
Yep.
So now what's lacking is that adrenal rush that helps me to deal with the aches and pains and the immobility sometimes.
Sure.
Now, do we sometimes get involved with these drugs after we finish playing so that we can maintain some of that adrenaline to block out some of that? Do you get a sense of that?
No, most of it is depression. So a lot of the guys are treating the depression. What you just described is the classic thing that happens with post NFL players. Some of them get depressed.
You mean just depression from not playing ball anymore?
Yeah, because now
not just talking about
your
the pain.
sense of purpose is diminished.
Well, that's what Junior say out. They say he kept talking about not having
a sense, no reason to get up. So you sort of get to the point where you say, why am I getting up? And so you get a theme of that because everybody who talked to Junior Seau, now this is a macho guy, so he was depressed, but he never really went through the aggressive problems that you see with some other guys. So he basically everybody was just shocked because, and that's what you hear all the time. You hear people say, "Well, man, I
this recent situation with the Chiefs player, everyone says I'm shocked."
Sure. So there's no way I could have predicted, but there are usual telltale signs. The question is whether, and there are telltale signs, and we actually have evidence that those exist.
But you have to be a trained individual to identify those signs
Sure.
as leading. Am I wrong?
No question about it. For instance, with concussion, because actually at the core of all this is concussion. You think about the stats, man. If you think about the fact that 3.8 million kids and adults who play sports, contact sports, they suffer concussions a year.
Well, I know they say soccer, kid soccer teams, they have just as much, if not more, of these concussed episodes.
So they fall into the stats. That's a huge problem. And so the question is, how do we circumvent that? And, the problem is that, these things are linked to money. I always say to myself, every Sunday, we have our favorite teams. You have your team that you want to root for. Honestly, I'll sit there and rejoice when I see what I call a spectacular hit. So, and you used to give some spectacular hits, I bet you,
And I took some, so that's the business.
And that's it. So there's money behind that. And that's what the issue is. How do you keep the money within the game and keep these guys safe? It's a big problem.
Okay, doctors, we were talking about the business aspect of it. There are two aspects that drive the money part. First, the sponsorships, advertisement that comes from different corporations because you like to see those big hits. There are people who are watching these games, these eyeballs are worth some money. So beverage companies, car companies, etc., they invest a lot of money, and this is one of the ways that the leagues and the colleges generate their revenue to pay people. Make sense? The second thing is the attendance. All right, that's driven by a bunch of things, including the fact that people like to get together with their families, and this is part of it. Okay. The third part of it is the television revenue. Now, when I was playing college ball, that's when ESPN first came into being, and I remember reading about these mega contracts that the NCAA was now writing with these individual conferences with these networks, ABC, CBS, and these contracts were worth so much money. Now, is it possible to play this game? Is the question. Is it possible to play this game? Deal with the health aspects of it. Now, I'm not sure we can keep football players quote-unquote safe because the nature of the game is collision.
It's a violent sport. Yeah. It's a violent sport.
Like boxing.
It's a violent sport.
With that being the case, can we still work on improving the health while they're playing and after and still be able to support the business side of it the way that we are? It can't be impossible to do, but what aspect of it? What aspect of it makes it so difficult from your vantage point in terms of being able to play the game, support the players, make sure they're healthy, and infringing upon the business side of it?
Yeah, part of the thing is that, you have to understand that the guys are faster. The guys are more athletic. They're bigger.
Well, bigger, stronger, faster.
They're bigger, stronger, faster. And even though the NFL, for instance, has instituted a lot of policies to decrease some of these occurrences.
Right, some of the impact of the collision.
It still occurs.
It's going to occur.
So the issue then is there are some helmets, for instance, that can be used to minimize the likelihood of concussions. We see this with guys, for instance, who do motorcycles. We know that certain helmets will save the guy's brains if they wipe out of their motorcycle. So we can use some of that technology to protect some of these guys because they're going to get some vicious hits, whether we like it or not. That's the nature of the game. But that could be one way of addressing it.
Now, what about this issue is so important to you? What made you decide to delve into it, talk about it, the human side of it, the business side, doesn't matter to me. What is it that's driving you to address some of
The issue is quality of life. One of the things is, as I'm getting older and I've taken care of hundreds of patients who come into me with multiple problems. I've taken care of veterans who have been to the military and have been deployed to places like Vietnam and North Korea, and I've seen some of these guys who are living with chronic pains, who are living with chronic situations that we have no remedy for. It's sort of one of those things that just tugs at my heartstring because I'm concerned about the human factor. We're not meant to live forever, but at the end of the day, you want to hope that when you do live, you live a good quality life that is not plagued by nightmares, that is not plagued by pain and all that. And part of my interest in this is just an offshoot of what I do, which is take care of patients and prolong their survival, because I treat a condition that is the leading cause of death in America. So I'm concerned about making sure that if we're going to address that leading cause of death, then hopefully the quality of life at the other end of that is going to justify.
Well, I turned on a football game the other day, and I was sitting with my mother, and I was counting them up. And there were 2 Caucasian Americans on offense and none on defense. And then when it switched around, it was the same thing.
Yep.
It may have been a quarterback and 1 or 2 linemen. 85% of the guys on the field, in some cases 70% of the guys on the team, African American males.
Yep.
Now you're talking about folks who oftentimes deal with these disparate health issues, as you talked about in the prior show anyway.
Yep.
How does it impact us differently, or does it impact us differently than it does other folks?
It does affect us disproportionately, only because of their representation. If you go back to the recruitment strategy now, and so that becomes an issue, and you probably can give more insight in that than I can. But part of the challenges, for instance, to my surprise, recently I was listening to this show where they were discussing how if you are a player in college, now you correct me on this one.
Okay.
Your first year, if you can come out the first year, your value is a certain way. And if for every year after that you stay in college, you diminish your value. And I said, that's a strange way of looking at you, because number one, if you come out and you have not achieved a degree, so think about what's going to happen to you after you finish the career.
Well, part of it is if you have a guy who is especially in basketball, where he's a superstar player,
right?
Especially in basketball, where you may not have as much difference in the physiology because it's not a collision sport.
Right.
So you take a Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James. LeBron decided to go right into the pros. He told Carmelo he was nuts because Carmelo decided to go to Syracuse and play in college.
Right.
Well, the bottom line is they don't have to absorb the kind of collision that you do in football. And because of that, especially with basketball players, if they are top-notch players, we from the DC area, we call it the Albert King theory. Years ago, University of Maryland, Albert King, his junior year, he was one of the top players in the nation and probably would have been the first player picked. He decided to come back for his senior year. Well, his stock dropped. When his stock dropped, in his case, it was a difference of millions and millions of dollars. Millions of dollars.
So that's crazy.
Well, okay, crazy as that is, this is the marketplace.
Sure, I get it. I understand the money part of it. Yep.
Now, it's our job as educators and coaches to prepare the parents and the students for this. However, we have to almost tell them opposite of what they're hearing from the very people that are feeding them. Because what drives it is the opposite of what we're going to tell them. We're going to tell them, now I will never advocate for someone who has a chance to make $1 million at 18 or 88. Don't do it.
No, I agree with that.
But the other side of it is, it's a short-lived endeavor. That in athletics is the reverse of any other industry or profession.
Sure.
Your peak value is early and then it crashes. Whereas in your profession and in most professions, you have an upward slope.
Sure.
Now, that being the case, can you understand, or can we understand why athletes will do anything that they can do
Absolutely.
to get on the field?
No, absolutely, and that's the problem. It's going to be the warrior mentality. I mean, Jay Cutler was knocked out. You could see his eyes. He looked like he was about to pass out.
Right.
Yet he still took another snap, and so he's going to do that. If you tell
He
him,
has to do that.
he has to do that. And so that's what you look at. That's that warrior mentality that, as you said, hell, you played hurt and you actually overcame, and you don't even know how you did it. And there you were. And later on, you probably still have the aches and pains after that. Once the adrenaline went away. And that's what these guys do. And it's hard to divorce them from that. And I believe that the data, the clinical scientific data, is showing us that a lot of these guys get depressed, and as they withdraw from what has become their community, and all of a sudden they get that sense of, they become isolated, and as they become isolated, like Judas Iscariot, they kill themselves.
Right, so you go from this community and this camaraderie in the locker room,
Yep.
the fans,
Yep.
the media, and all of a sudden all of that's gone.
That's gone.
Before we close up on this part, let's talk about that pharmacological, so to speak, that pharmacological link again.
Sure.
Now, walk me through this. A player retires, or the day is done, he's not playing football anymore.
Yep.
He has these aches and pains. He's used to medicating these aches and pains. Now, all of a sudden, it's not available through the team or the program anymore.
Sure.
What does he do then?
He's got to pay for it. Now he's got to pay for it. And as you know, there's usually no short supply. And 9 times out of 10, and again,
And you pay for it and get it any way you can.
you can get it any way you can. You can get it any way you can. And basically, take for instance this guy, McHale, a young guy, 46 years old, met his wife when he was 20. He was 23, she was 19, and they basically college sweethearts. They grew up together. He had 3 boys, and set up a business post NFL career. And he just went into the spiral of drug addiction. He would have fits of rage where he slows himself down with narcotic medications, and then to wake himself up, he would get a speedball. So basically, it became a spiral. And at the end of the day, when he had actually committed himself to go in for rehab, he OD'd. He was staying at a friend of his, and actually was able to secure a large stash. And he took that stash, probably saying, "This is my last hurrah." And it turned out that was literally, unfortunately, his last hurrah. 45-year-old guy gone. His wife is widowed, and he's got sons that are going to be raised without their father.
Okay, now, from a medicinal standpoint, all right, this is where we are. We're talking to some people out there who are dealing with this very issue right now as you speak. 27 years old, 37 years old, 47, doesn't matter.
Yep.
Now, having this spiral, what do you recommend as the first step toward addressing this?
The key is family. The family has to be able to learn some of those signs. And that's important too, because that can actually trigger, for instance, some of these guys are going to have some role models. Think about this kid who just killed himself in Kansas.
Right.
I mean, he killed his girlfriend and then went to speak to his coach.
Right.
So, and then general manager. So basically, there are some maybe some figures that they recognize as authority that they respect. So that may help.
Okay.
Yet, the biggest thing is that now we do have some facilities where these guys can actually seek help. They can look at some physicians who can actually help them to identify some of these things and try to get them rehabbed. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be the key. But you have to understand also that some of these guys have some legitimate injuries. They have protruding discs. They have some legitimate
That may
reasons.
require some surgical intervention. Okay.
But there's one guy in New Jersey, for instance, who started a company. He's a physician. He does that in his pocket, where he actually brings these guys in to treat them. He says that some of them have to be actually detoxed because they're too toxic to put to sleep and do the operations. So he pays for their operations. He has a facility that he's rich, so he pays for their facility that gives them the operations that they need to get them over those humps. But before he can even do that, they got to go through this big detox.
Now, understand, we're not going to let this go. All right, this is going to be a recurring theme for us for a while. And we're going to develop it. We're going to hopefully talk to some people who've been involved with this industry as players, as coaches, as trainers, and get some feedback from them. And I'm going to ask them to continue to engage that dialogue, because I think if we have enough of an impact, at least through the medium that we're using, that it may trigger or spawn an opportunity for someone to get help who needs help,
You bet. Yeah, no,
or maybe have an impact on the industry itself.
absolutely. It will be definitely my pleasure.
All right, Doc.
Thanks.
Appreciate you once again.
Appreciate
Hey
it.
guys, Roland Grimes, Not Just Sports Entertainment Show. Back at you in a little bit. Shooting from M Lounge, Capitol Heights, Maryland, 5205. You hear the party going on, getting ready for the big Monday Night Football game. Hey guys, Roland Bubba Grimes. Talk to you in a little bit. Bye-bye.